Hello, this is Dread from Epic Builds, and in today's video topic, we're going to talk about the recent addiction I've had and caused a lot of problems with my workflow. Slormancer was a game that I played about a year ago when it was released into early access. It had a few problems, and most of them were addressed between then and now. Fast forward to the present, and I've already lost a week to the game again. And I have enjoyed every second of that week because it gave me a fresh perspective of the ARPG genre and also has made me realize what I love about ARPGs. The insane levels of depth and detail you can spend on a singular character, refining it for hours on end, only to realize you need to go a completely different direction with the character to reach enlightenment. So, what has changed with Slormancer since the last time I played? A lot, actually. First thing off, we have gone from only having one act for leveling to 3 acts. They raised the level cap from 40 to 60, gave us more ancestral stones to play with, pretty much just another endgame skill tree system, a large amount of new Slore Reapers to play with and build around, a new cast of enemies to fight, which I was getting very tired of the old ones when I was playing back in the day. And to top it all off, a fully functional loot filter, and a very good one at that. All of these things were criticisms I've had about the game about a year ago, and I am proud to say they have fixed almost every single one of them, and it's just led me to go from interested in the game to absolutely loving it. Problem is, I make Last Epoch content and not Slormancer content, and my projects have been halted as a consequence. So you know what that means? It's build guide time so I can finish this. And if you've never seen Slormancer or played it, don't fret. I'll make it super simple so that you can understand the concept of the build even if you've never played before. So the name of the build is Bleed, Pop, Throwing Armor, Stacking Regen, Sword of the Sharpshooter, Enduring Protector. This build sprung up from me just dropping the Slore Reaper, Sword of the Sharpshooter, while leveling this new knight. I love the idea of gaining a bunch of projectiles while standing still, so I decided to build completely around it. So I ended up incorporating a lot of standing still idle mechanics into the build, into what you see now. Before we get into the guide, I just need to say, this is my first time playing Slormancer in about a year. So if I have any inefficiencies in the build, don't fret. Please leave a comment down below about it so that we can refine this archetype as much as possible. So the main idea is we throw out some swords, which apply bleeds to targets. Thanks to Bloodshed, we apply bleeds in an AoE when we hit enemies, which is important for this next part. We then attack with either our counterattack from Deflect or our Wooden Stick, which is our other attack, which will then make the bleeds explode thanks to Bloody Explosion, dealing skill damage to the target, which can crit and is just a hit. This allows us to, instead of scaling bleed, we can directly pop our bleeds and deal skill damage instead, increasing our clear speed significantly. This on top of bleeding overdrive, which allows us to overdrive with our swords, which is normally a melee only mechanic, meaning every time we hit an enemy it spawns a ball that seeks enemies and applies bleeds as well. So we end up stacking 5 to 6 bleeds to everything in the pack. Then of course our hits come through and pop all of these. Thanks to the fact we're standing still to gain all these projectiles from our Slore Reaper, it means we can build into other mechanics based on idling like mental inertia, which allows us to move around a slight amount and keep our buffs up, letting us dodge things like witch silences, which are very annoying for this build, and AoEs with ease. This on top of Greaves of Stability for a large amount of DR for standing still, this in with tandem with Deflect, which is simply an immunity shield that lasts for a few seconds, lets us stand still with no problem, so we can benefit from the 10 projectiles, possibly more, later from our weapon. If you enjoyed the build, I'd suggest liking the video and subscribing to the channel, as that's the best way to support my efforts here at Epic Builds, tells me you want to see more of Slormancer, and also is the best way to tell YouTube that I'm doing a good job. With all that being said, let's get in game, shall we? All right, here we're in game with the build. So I would heavily suggest if you see anything wrong with this build, please tell me down below. I built this without any external source possible because I was just pretty much playing by myself. I did have the Discord loaded up, but I haven't like actually asked anything about it. So this has all been from my own head. So first things off, we finally got to Wrath 5. I've been doing Wrath 5 fine. I'll do like 20 to 30 waves of Wrath 5, and then I quit. And of course, for Slormancer, we got to 96. We were about to get to 100, but I got tired of running the Slormancer temple because I didn't have enough Ellie res at the time, which I have enough Ellie res now. Now, let's just go over the passives, I think. The problem is I don't know how to exactly go about a Slormancer build, so let's just talk about passives. So for our throwing sword here, for our first rank, we grab heavy injury. It makes its sword bleeds, deal increased damage. Sadly, we don't really care about this node. This does not make the bleed pops deal increased damage, but the other nodes are kind of like meh. I'm already slowing and stuff, so like none of this actually matters on the first rank. Although if you're leveling with this, I would heavily suggest running Blood Donation just for the reduced mana cost. But sadly, when our mana cost gets to like 248, this node stops being useful, and I hope that maybe one day they update it so that it's useful in the later tiers when you have such insane mana costs. Now, our next rank here is going to be Quicksilver. Throwing Sword has negative cooldown time. If you don't know, in Slormancer, cooldown time is how fast you can attack. It's like your attack speed or whatever. So the more cooldown you get, the better, right? Now, the problem with this node is the fact that it's reduced for each bleed stack on the enemies around all the way down to 40%. So if we have more bleed stacks on enemies, the less cooldown we get. But thankfully, since we're constantly proccing our bleeds on targets and destroying them, this node actually doesn't really come into effect, at least the downside, because guess what? All the bleeds are gone, which is great. And of course, the node that we build the build around, whenever you deal damage to an enemy with a different skill other than throwing sword, and this includes deflect and stick, and probably astral retribution, I think counts for it. Don't quote me on that. And the explosion does a bunch of skill damage for each bleed stack on the target. So for instance, if you have 10 bleed stacks, you'll deal like 90k plus the crit plus whatever else, right? And that's pretty much how our build is built around. It feels pretty good. I've been enjoying it. Now, obviously, I'm probably not playing this correctly, if you'll know if you'll read the comments, but I think this has gotten very close to what I want. Because the reason why you do this, I think you can crit with bleeds in this game. I'm not entirely sure if you can, but if you can't, then the main reason to go this is so that we can crit with our explosion and deal a bunch of hit damage, which of course is faster than dot damage, because dot damage does a lot of damage. The problem is it's over 7 seconds. So you're doing like 7k per second, but if we pop like 3 to 4 bleeds on a target, they just pop and they die, which is like what I was going for. And I'm not entirely sure how to refine this even further. Now for our second to last rank here, we grab Bleeding Overdrive. This allows us to overdrive. Pretty much overdrive is those red orbs you see. So whenever I hit an enemy, I will overdrive and it will cause like a little orb that will bounce 2 times and hit enemies. Now, overdrives that are triggered by throwing sword apply a bleed on hit. And the reason why I like that is because we want as many bleeds on the targets as possible so we can pop them with Bloody Explosion. So overdrive is really good for clearing packs. And I believe you get like 1 overdrive on a single target. I'm not entirely sure. I think you get at least 1. Now, for the last node here, the node that makes the build work, Bloodshed. So throwing sword also applies a bleed to all enemies within a 2-yard radius. It's also an area of effect, so it can actually get skilled. Now, the way this works is, as you can tell, we have a lot of projectiles. Now, as we are bleeding multiple enemies in an area, we will shotgun the bleeds, quote unquote. So for instance, if an enemy is within 3 radiuses of swords and they apply bleeds to targets, they'll get 3 instances of bleed on them, as well as the bleeding overdrive. Now, I'm not entirely sure if the bleeding overdrive counts for the bloodshed. I don't think it does, at least from my knowledge, but it'll still apply a bunch of bleeds, and most of the time when I throw my swords into a pack, I usually bleed about like 6 times, and then we pop that, and bam, they're dead. That's great. Now for single targets, stuff like mainly the Keeper, which is like the boss for like the new game mode, I usually use just a flesh wound instead, so it does double the amount of bleed stacks because bleeding overdrive isn't as useful on single target. Now for wooden stick here, this is the main thing that we use to proc the damage, like to proc the explosion. Our sticks actually don't do that much damage, but it does make it so that we can pop our damage pretty easily with all these splinters and stuff like that. Now, our first rank is a toss up between return on investment, which gives us a bunch of mana on hit. This is very important if you don't have any mana regen on gear, if you don't have good mana leech. Eventually, I planned on getting enough mana leech on gear so that we can run this instead, Armor of the Forest. Now, this allows us to pretty much always get up to 10 stacks, and it's like 100% increased armor at max stacks, which is up all the time if you have this node. And the reason we like this so much is because we're scaling a bunch of armor so that we don't die when we get hit by anything. And of course, we're actually scaling an elemental res with our armor as well. But yeah, normally you just start with this first and then move into this. Then for the next rank, we do have Revenge of the Forest. This does make it so we get Astral Retributions. It doesn't really do anything for us. The problem is like we don't care about anything else on this rank, so moving on. Forest Blast is great because it makes it so that whenever we hit like a wall or something, it like explodes in splinters, and then it will like hit enemies and proc the bleeds even faster, which is great. Then we go for Strength of Forest to reduce the mana cost of our wooden stick to 0 because we're not using it for damage, we're just using it to kill stuff. And it's the better option out of all of them because it means you need less mana regen overall or mana sustain. Then, of course, the last thing we get is Root. The reason why we like Root of the Forest is because we actually get a lot of knockback. Now, what Root does is make it so that enemies cannot move after you root them. And this makes it so that when we're knocking them back, they stay in place instead of like trying to walk towards us. So they actually end up being knocked back faster because of this, and they end up being far away. And it's really cool. That's pretty much it for Stick. And then for deflect here, our mastery, like our skill tree mastery, we have passive stamina. We're going for a bunch of life regen on our build, although you could go for block as well or for the armor scaling, but I like the life regen myself. This might not be the case when I invest more into life leech, but the idea is we keep our HP low and we boost up our defenses like our DR, our armor, and our Ellie res, and make it so that our life is really low but our like DR is really high, so that when enemies like hit us, like we can leech it back very quickly or regen it very quickly. And that's generally the ideology of getting all this regen stuff. Then we get deflect. Deflect lasts 3 seconds longer. This is our shield, and as things hit us, they deflect. And those will actually pop our bleed pops as well. Most of the time, I can attack in a pack, they'll attack back, and they'll absolutely kill themselves because the bleed pops, and it's great. And we want this to last as long as possible because when we're standing still, we want to be able to just be able to stand still, right? And of course, the next rank is Deflection. Deflection's cooldown time is reduced by 3% for every nullified attack. This saves you sometimes as you get a rapidly used deflection a bunch of times in a row. Then passive offensive, we should be running this. Avenging Wrath. If deflect is fortunate or perfect, you can trigger one counter technique for every nullified attack in a random direction when their deflect ends. So the way this works is there's like a little counter here that says your luck, and when it's 100%, if you cast your deflection, it will make it so that for every deflect you cast when you're deflecting, counterattack, it will create like a gigantic AoE of deflects. Is this good? It's kind of okay. It saved me in a few situations, but like our other options aren't anywhere better, right? Now, on this list here, we have Skewer. This doesn't really matter. We don't really have anything on this rank for us. Then Full Plate Armor. We have 100% increased armor, but we have negative 35% movement speed while in combat. Now, you must be wondering, Dread, well, you have a lot of movement speed then, right? No, that is not what I'm doing. So, for instance, for our I gotta go all the way over here though. How we're combating this negative effect, because negative 35% movement speed sucks, is utilizing the Ultimatum of Undisputed Speed. Pretty much what this does is it sets our movement speed to like 3 or whatever, or however much we upgrade it. I haven't done much Slorm Temple outside of this. And this allows it so that we can like run a bunch of negative movement speed modifiers like this one and still be at like a decent amount of movement speed. Now, I wouldn't grab this node until you had the ultimatum, so I would suggest waiting. And the way you get the ultimatum is in the Slorm Temple, and then you upgrade it through Ore in here. Now, the next one is Safety Bubble. You are immune to area damage during Deflect. This makes it so that all of those pesky AoEs under your feet are immune. You're immune to them while you're deflecting, and it makes you feel a lot tankier because most of the time you're gonna die to like the turtle shell guys that like do their AoEs under you. So this makes you immune to those. And this also makes you a lot easier to deal with the Keeper, because in the Keeper, all of them are AoEs, so this like makes you immune to like all the traps and stuff, which is great. And then for the last one, we go for Elder Armor. It makes it so our chest stats are added twice. Eventually, I wanted to level this up, and this would give us a bunch of flat stats. I think it would also give us 10 levels on Adrian's Storm Reapers, and it would also give us 3 dexterity. Please quote me if I'm wrong. I think we get tested, actually. Let me test. So here we're at that, and then if I take this off, oh, it definitely does not double that, so which is fine. But all the other stats, like the armor, the life regen, the Elirez, the raw damage, they all get doubled. Like, for instance, you can tell that's a lot of armor on our chest. And eventually we'd upgrade this to the maximum and have a bunch of armor, which is why we're grabbing that. And that's pretty much it for the skill trees here. We do have Ancestral Stones. Pretty much the idea with Ancestral Stones is we're grabbing Ice Aura, makes it so that when it's toggled, negative 25, negative like 45% attack speed for enemies nearby. That's great. Makes it so that enemies don't hit us as quickly with melee attacks or just attack speed attacks in general. Then we grab Pain Weaver, just get a bunch of raw damage. All of our damage is raw damage, which is nice. Then damage to elites is nice, and mana regen's nice as well. Then we travel through Elemental Boost to Exceptional Accuracy for the 20% projectile speed is great. The 10% pierce chance, which we need. Getting closer to 100% pierce chance is amazing for this build because as a sword goes through an enemy and hits the next enemy, it will apply another bleed, which will create the AoE bleed, which will apply the bleed to the enemy behind you as well, and you will apply way more bleeds because of this. The armor, the chance to knock back on projectiles, great, because we're knocking back enemies as we kill them. And then, of course, the armor pen. I believe it works for the bleed pop. I couldn't get an answer on the Discord. This is actually why I joined the Discord, was so I could ask this question, but I didn't get an answer. But I'm going to assume it works because we have like skill damage and armor pen over here as well. So I'm going to assume armor pen does work. And that's pretty much it for the skill trees. Now for the gearing here. Our Slur Reaper, Primordial Sword of the Sharpshooter. This makes it so that while we're idle for at least 0.5 seconds, we gain a bunch of additional projectiles. In the Primordial Benediction of this weapon, we get a bunch more projectiles. So the way this works is you drop, like, let's pretend you already have this weapon, because I would suggest having this weapon for starting this build if you were to. I would have this weapon, and it would start out with the regular mode here. Where is it? Let me find it. It is right here. Here's the regular Sword of the Sharpshooter. I got it to like level 73. And the idea is once you get it to like 42,000-ish kills, a little bit more than that, it will turn into a Primordial Sword and you'll have access to both. And it will come with a good side and a downside. So our Primordial Benediction is we gain a bunch of additional projectile multiplier. That is a more multiplier to our projectiles. So for instance, we scroll over here, we actually have a bunch of additional projectiles here. We have like 3.5% added percent and then 64% modifier. So you get almost close to 9 extra projectiles, and we're already at like 10 projectiles in total. And that is why this is so strong, is we get to shoot out like 10 swords at once. Now we have to be idle for that, but then it makes it, the Primal Malediction makes it so that without steady feet, you no longer fire additional projectiles. So as long as I am walking, I will no longer shoot out additional projectiles, which is a lie because of something else we're going to talk about. Mental Inertia. So mental inertia, idle related effects now disappear after a 3-second delay after you start moving. Now, as I upgrade and reinforce this, this will go up higher and higher. So we can go like a 6-second without stopping. And this makes it so that we can clear much faster. We get that buff from the Adrion's Swarm Reaper here, and we can just move while we're dealing damage, and then we just have to stop every so often. And that will make the build feel way better. Another item we have is Greaves of Stability, which makes it so that we get a bunch of DR while standing still. And of course, this works with Mental Inertia as well as the Primordial Sword of the Sharpshooter. So that's good combo. Then, of course, the last legendary I have is Ethereal Cloning Pads, which just gives you a bunch of additional projectiles as you level it up and stuff. Now, the main stat we want on gear is Pierce Chance, life regen, and armor. Those are like the biggest things. Everything else is like raw damage, armor, dexterity, toughness, the usual. These pair of gloves, I love them. They rolled with max pierce chance, which is cool, and then a bunch of overdrive chance. I need to level it up 8 more times. It'll be a little expensive, but these gloves are like I dropped these at like level 20. I've been upping them because they have been absolutely amazing to get me up to that pierce chance, because right now I'm only at 63% pierce chance. I want to be way closer, like 80, 90%, and that will make my clear feel buttery smooth, because then we'll hit extra stuff, we'll overdrive more, and we'll have a lot of fun. But yeah, overdrive chance, critical strike chance, raw damage, overdrive chance, life regen, armor, Ellie, percentage Ellie res is pretty good too. The reason why percentage Ellie res is good is because we get a bunch of flat Ellie res from our tree here. Oh, I forgot our attributes. We get a bunch of Ellie res equal to 25% of our armor, which then gets multiplied by our increased elemental res as well. So that's like, that feels really good. And that's pretty much it for gearing. Now for the attributes here, mainly we want to go all the way into dexterity, because not only do we get a bunch of knockback, which is great for our build because we want to be ranged and we're standing still, so we want things to be away from us. We also get a bunch of flat crit if enemies are not nearby us, which thanks to the knockback helps a lot. And of course we get a bunch of pierce because of it as well, which is of course a lot more synergy as well. That's like all of that, like the whole dexterity tree also gives us a bunch of Reaper damage, attack speed, which attack speed makes it so we attack faster, so we cool down faster pretty much. And then the last part, we want the toughness so that we can get the armor to Ellie res. And that's pretty much it for the build overall. Hopefully that's a little comprehensive. Sadly, I don't really have all day to talk about this, but mainly you just want stats like these, where like you get life regen, raw damage, pierce, crit, overdrive. Now, I don't think this is the best thing you could be doing. You could probably just focus on bleeds itself. Get the fork here, go for just bleeds, ignore this, and then scale the damage over time, because you can actually roll really high damage over time. You could go for Mr. Banner of War here. You can go for skewers for a bunch more damage over time. There's a bunch of stuff you could do with these builds, but overall, I really enjoyed this build. And that's I think that's pretty much it. With all that being said, if you have any questions, leave them down below. You can also join the Discord as well. If you have any, and with all that being said, have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you're at, and bye.